समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
In a region caught in the great power contestation between the United States and China, a sudden military escalation between two ASEAN members, Thailand and Cambodia, has jolted the Indo-Pacific. Today, the conflict entered its fifth day when talks started in Malaysia to find a way out. That said, fighting should stop as the two sides have agreed to a ceasefire starting 1700 GMT on 28th July, after at least 35 people have been killed and almost 300,000 people have been displaced along the 817-kilometer long border that Thailand and Cambodia share. The aim of the meeting held at Malaysia was to quickly find a ceasefire. Now, an attempt was made already by the self-proclaimed peacemaker of the world, which is Donald Trump, but that attempt had failed and fighting had continued. Now, before I tell you more about the bigger power play, let me spend a minute explaining that it is Thailand that has exponentially better military capabilities, including the Gripens and F-16s, etc. In fact, while the initial part of the conflict saw Thailand deploying the F-16s, a couple of days later, Gripens too have been deployed. Now, these two jets, that is F-16 and Gripens, were deployed to carry out airstrikes against Cambodian military targets in the Phu Ma Kwa area and the Ta Mueang Thon temple, where Cambodian forces had positioned indirect fire weapons. For the Gripens, it marks their first combat strikes. In case you may be wondering why would Thailand want a ceasefire despite having the upper hand, it is because this military escalation with Cambodia and the manner in which it unfolded ever since the famous phone call from the 38-year-old Thai Prime Minister Shinawatra was made to the Cambodian political heavyweight Hun Sen uncle. This phone call, you'd recall, was leaked by the latter on Facebook, which was interpreted as anti-Thai army and had perpetuated a political crisis in the fragile coalition government in Thailand. Now let's return to the larger question. In my opinion, implications for regional stability and the broader US-China strategic rivalry, which is often dubbed the Cold War 2.0, were already profoundly visible in the recent Southeast Asian crisis. Now, for observers in South Asia or Southern Asia, the crisis strikes a familiar chord. Much like the subcontinent's own post-colonial challenges, this conflict is deeply rooted in contested borders, callously drawn by colonial powers. In South Asia, the legacy lies with the British. In Southeast Asia, it's the French. Now, at present, the timing couldn't be more telling. Global military budgets are rising amid geopolitical strains, and Southeast Asia is no exception. Even as ASEAN countries pursue deeper economic integration, modeling aspects of the European Union, defense spending has surged across the bloc. And ASEAN is anyway far from unified, either in its political or its economic or its military postures. Now, while the ASEAN free trade area has made strides in tariff reduction despite wide disparities, Singapore boasts high per capita income and advanced infrastructure, while countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar continue to struggle with poverty, fragile institutions, and a very uncertain future. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the fragmented security postures. In security terms, ASEAN remains a mosaic of national agendas, even when China's aggressive build-up in the South China Sea and its 9-dash line have claimed the EEZ of several ASEAN members, such as Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. A common threat should have united the bloc, but on the contrary, China is also the largest trading partner for the bloc, and taking sides remains unaffordable for most within ASEAN, even ones with pro-West tilt. Now, their military modernization is progressing, but along divergent paths, creating divergent path dependencies. And I'll tell you about these dependencies a little while later. For now, let's check out some data. Between 2013 and 2022, the region spent approximately $60.9 billion on weapons procurement and defense R&D, according to this international think tank called IISS, or the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Yet, these efforts reflect broader geopolitical leanings, with some countries leaning towards the US, like Thailand and Philippines, some towards China, like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, and some building ties with Russia, such as Vietnam and Indonesia. But at the same time, the presence of UK, the presence of France, as well as the growing influence of Turkey and Israel, all of this adds layers of complexity to the region. But before I come to the path dependencies and weapons procurement, let me tell you a little bit about the imperial past to the military clashes. Southeast Asia has long been a stage for great power rivalry. The roots of the current Thailand-Cambodia conflict lie in the 1907 Franco-Siamese Treaty. Under pressure from both Britain and France, Siam, which is modern-day Thailand, ceded territories to the French. Now, at the same time, Cambodia was under French rule, and the treaty left many areas of the border vague, setting the stage for future disputes. During the Second World War, Siam allied with Japan and briefly regained some of the lost lands. But following Japan's defeat, these territories returned to the French control. When Cambodia gained independence in 1953, the problematic colonial borders remained. One hotspot is the Priya Vihar temple. Though the International Court of Justice awarded it to Cambodia in 1962, the surrounding areas were left undefined, leaving the conflict to simmer. Now then came the Cold War. The Cold War further complicated the picture. Cambodia's civil war, the Khmer Rouge regime, and Vietnam's 1978 invasion turned the Thai-Cambodian border into a Cold War flashpoint. The US, China, and several ASEAN members supported anti-Vietnamese resistance, including remnants of the Khmer Rouge. Even after Vietnam withdrew in 1989 and the 1991 Paris Peace Accords attempted to stabilize the region, no durable border resolution could be reached. Now, efforts at rapprochement emerged in the 2000s, culminating in a February 2024 strategic partnership between Cambodia and Thailand focused on de-escalation as well. But on May 28, 2025, which is this year, a deadly clash between patrols in a disputed area killed a Cambodian soldier, shattering that very fragile peace. And ever since, a serious escalation has followed. So, is it a new Cold War, or is it something more complex? You know, in the recent military standoff, Thailand clearly dominated from the go. The skies over Southeast Asia quickly became a theatre of conflict, with Thailand deploying its F-16 fighter jets and decimating Cambodia's 8th and 9th Infantry Divisions. For the first time, Thailand also fielded its Ukrainian-made T-84 Oplot M main battle tanks in combat, facing off against Cambodia's outdated T-55s. Later, Gripens were also deployed in successful operations. And remember that the disparity in military capabilities between the two nations is not merely significant, it is exponential. So Cambodia's decision to escalate, despite its weaker military, raises certain questions. One possible explanation is Chinese backing, part of a broader strategy to test the limits of US commitment to its allies. China could be backing Cambodia. Now, why I say this is because US arms sales, including to Thailand, are governed by strict end-use agreements which limit how and against whom they can be deployed. So it is unlikely that Thailand would have used the F-16s without prior US consent. Now, this is not the case for Gripens, as Sweden gives full operational autonomy to its buyers. But coming back to the US, This suggests that Washington tacitly approved Thailand's response, a subtle yet pointed signal to Beijing, which has become Cambodia's chief military patron since 2017. After Cambodia dissolved its main opposition party and jailed political leaders, until then the US was the main aid giver. But then when this happened, the US slashed aid. And China quickly stepped in with military equipment, training, and joint exercises such as the Golden Dragon. But more concerning is China's role in expanding the Ream naval base on Cambodia's southern coast. Though not officially a military base, satellite imagery shows a pier nearly identical in length and design to one at China's Djibouti base, capable of docking its largest aircraft carriers. Now, US officials have repeatedly raised concerns about growing Chinese military access to the base. These developments may explain why Washington allowed Thailand to make a strong military response, allowing it to use the F-16s, viewing it as an opportunity to counterbalance Chinese influence. But there is more to the wider web of power projection in the region. This conflict must also be understood in the broader context of foreign power projection in Southeast Asia. Now, the US has deepened ties with the Philippines, now one of ASEAN's most hawkish voices in China, and this is apart from US cooperation with Thailand. China, on its part, pushes the ASEAN region with selectively providing military equipment to some. Then it also claims EEZ of various countries, and it has established military bases in the artificially constructed islands in the South China Sea. But it's not just about US and China. Other external powers are involved as well. The UK, for instance, exerts influence through the Five Power Defence Arrangements, or the FPDA, a long-standing, though non-binding security agreement with Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia and Singapore to ensure peace between Malaysia and Singapore. Now, for those of you who do not know the context, on the 9th of August in 1965, Singapore had officially parted ways with Malaysia, becoming an independent and sovereign nation. This split was driven by serious political and economic disagreements between the leadership in both countries, which had fueled communal tensions and led to racial riots in July and September of 1964. Now, although those tensions have long since eased, the UK still maintains its involvement through existing defence arrangements and engages in regular defence exercises. Then France, which is another former colonial power. France also maintains a strategic presence in the Indo-Pacific as a resident Indo-Pacific power. It often promotes strategic autonomy, positioning itself as a balancing force in a region crowded with competing powers, but would certainly side with NATO allies if a hot war broke out. Further, France has also emerged as one of the key arms supplier to Indonesia. And that brings me to intra-ASEAN military tensions that carry geopolitical implications as well. Now, Indonesia has long struggled to fully control its own airspace, as parts of it, including over the Rio Islands and the Strait of Malacca, are under Singaporean operational control. Strange, right? So, Jakarta is now addressing these concerns by enhancing its air defense capabilities by ordering a huge number of Rafale jets from France amidst other equipment. But then, the same Indonesia has also struck a $10 billion worth of deal for Turkish-built Khan 5th generation fighter jets, which will involve significant contributions from Pakistani engineers, 150 Pakistani engineers to be exact. Now, it is also close to getting Turkish Ankar drones. Coming to Malaysia, that is also interested in Turkish drones, have bought armoured vehicles from Turkey along with Philippines. Now, as far as India is concerned, our most significant deal in the region has been the BrahMos missile to the Philippines, and the rest of all the talks still remain speculative. At its core, the Southeast Asian theatre remains central to the unfolding great power contest between the United States and China, which is backed by Russia. But it is important to note that world at large is moving towards self-sufficiency of defense chains through various kinds of systems integration and technology leakages, as we are witnessing an end of worldwide security providers, either by default or by design. Instead, I am of the opinion that the world is fast becoming a landscape where middle powers, France, the UK, Turkey, as well as big players like US, China, and declining players like Russia, continue to shape the strategic environment in nuanced, significant ways with a compartmentalized approach to platforms and systems deliveries, and these dynamics are etching a new kind of order that is more anarchic at its core than a simplistic Cold War 2.0 articulation could envisage. The Thailand-Cambodia escalation, much like the India-Pakistan escalation during Operation Sindoor, underscores not only the unresolved trauma of colonial legacies, but also how quickly they can be weaponized in today's fraught geopolitical climate, where the pattern of defense value chains is ushering in a new, unfamiliar, and a non-linear security order. Needless to say, as great powers maneuver and middle powers assert their influence, the Indo-Pacific grows more complex. With war now an ever-present possibility rather than a distant threat, Southeast Asia finds itself not just at the center of Cold War 2.0, but at the front line of an increasingly crowded, competitive, technologically advanced, and an unprecedentedly dangerous global order. I'll be back to discuss more on that, of course. Stay tuned.